Okay, Alexis, how you doing? I've got your workup. I've got your workup right here. Summer break, right? Yes, indeed. So great job. Really good narrative. I mean, you're telling a story crystal clear, crystal clear. There's no question about what's going on here. So this is fantastic. Really good job storytelling too. I think that the way that you have these assembled, especially the transitions between your images, I think makes really good sense. The setup is great. This is great. I love the setup. And who doesn't remember this? I mean, every one of us remembers this at standing pool edge and falling backwards in the water with our buddies. We all remember this. So this really is telling a story and really digging deep into the viewer to challenge the viewer to say, hey, you remember this. I know you do. And we do. We all do. So fantastic job there. As far as the narrative goes, I think you've just nailed it. So I want to talk about the actual narrative itself, and then I want to talk a little bit about visual communications in general, and then I want to talk about the technical merits of the images themselves. So let's take a look at the presentation itself. Now, I mentioned this. This is basic visual communication. So some psychological things and some things that go on in the subconscious mind when you're putting a presentation together, specifically a visual presentation. So one of the things that I see is that the images, they keep changing sizes every time we turn the page. So what does that do? And why is that something that would be considered something that could be improved upon? The reason being is that because in visual communications, you want to set a cadence for your viewer. And I've mentioned this before. If you've looked at some of the other videos, you've seen me mention this before, several times actually. You want to develop a cadence to the viewer. And that cadence establishes a rhythm for the viewer to go through the presentation. As that, one of the things that really establishes the harmony in that rhythm for the presentation is the image size itself and the consistency of the image size. Imagine if each size were completely different. Okay, so we have one this big, then the next page you have one this big, and then you have one this big, then you have one this big. And imagine if each of them are a different, you have one in black and white, the next one in color, or the next one in black and white. Okay, so what's happening is the mind is looking at the presentation and saying, in every transition that's going, the mind has to adjust. And the viewer doesn't realize they're doing it, but their mind is adjusting to accommodate for the changes in the size of each of the images in the presentation. It consumes a little bit of mental faculty so that you're distracting the viewer away from concentrating on the task at hand, which is the narrative. So what I'm saying is that I think that in a narrative assignment, it would be a really good idea to keep the images the consistent size. Now, you've done that with the background. I think these are all 13.33 by 7.5. So that's great, but the interior image itself, the page size is consistent. That's fantastic. It's a great start. But the images themselves are all different sizes within this 13.33 by 7.5 background. Very smart job using white for the background. Very smart. What I would recommend is changing the page size, or actually changing the dimensions of each image so that they're identical. So in your narratives, this could probably entail taking some cropping in Photoshop and going through all your images and saying, okay, what do these have in common and how can I crop them so they're all the same size while preserving the visual information that's encoded in each image. And then what you would do is you would see, these are all somewhat consistent right through here. This, I think, is why this image and this image really have a nice transition. And I started this out by talking about your transitions and how nicely some of the transitions are done. I'm specifically referring to this, and then this to this. Those are the same size, so you can see how easy it is. This is very much this image right here is very much a continuation of this image. And the mind knows that and perceives it because they're the same size. Okay, so the mind doesn't have to go, okay, something is different, therefore these images must be different. Okay, so again, I'm just pointing to the fact that you want to select a one common size for the images. The next thing I would recommend is, if you want to use a white background, that's fantastic. And white backgrounds work wonderful for a border around your images. And it's a practice that's as old as photography itself. One thing you don't want to do, which a lot of students have done, is put a black stroke around the image itself, because that kind of boxes things in. It doesn't allow the images themselves to have the relationship with the wide open and infinite world that they should have. Okay, so no black backgrounds, no black boxes around the images, but certainly white frames are wonderful. I think that, so in this case, what I would do is I would keep each image a consistent size, okay? Then in the background, maybe go light gray, and then your white, then either 1 inch or ½ inch or whatever white border around each image. So now you're setting up this cadence for the viewer. Everything is consistent. Every time you turn the page, you see the same background color, the same image size, the same border dimensions on each image, and it will allow the viewer to understand this cadence that you've developed. So the subconscious doesn't have to go in these directions going, why is this different? Why is that changed? Why is this vertical? Why is that horizontal? Do you see what I'm saying? So in that respect, I think that those little elements right there could definitely improve any visual narrative. Okay, so that said, let's jump to the technical merits. Well, actually, let's talk about the images first. These are great. I love the images. I think that you've just done a fantastic job. My favorites, this, remember we talked about this, you wanted to include the arm. I mean, I think the information that we need to understand what's going on here is right here. I mean, we can see they're on a ride and we can see their faces, and that tells the story right there. These boys are so happy right now. It's just so apparent what's happening. So remember we talked about cropping. I mentioned cropping, and you said you wanted the arm and some of the background stuff, which we don't need it. Clearly don't need it. So really good decision there. My favorite sequence is right through here. This to this is fantastic because this boy's got his helmet on. He's probably on deck, and he's probably waiting to get it back. So he is so deeply involved in concentrating on the task at hand, what needs to be done. Then he gets up, and that concentration just transposes right through to the to the next image. So that's a great little transition right there. And then I think the other transitions are good, but again, we have a couple of abrupt size changes. One thing I would recommend is that, and I've mentioned this again before in several of the critiques, is that each image in and of itself should tell a little bit of the story. Okay, this image I think was probably shot just a moment too late in order to do that, because every one of these images is able to stand on their own and tell a little individual story, with the exception of one, and that is this one. Why? Because the viewer comes in here with no prior knowledge of what you're doing. They look at this and they just see something that's splashing in the water. A lot of undeveloped meaning here. So I think if you were just to get that just a second earlier, where their backs and their backsides are just making contact with the water, then this image right here would be able to stand on its own. Okay, let's take a look at, I'm going to get rid of it. Okay, I want to take a look at some of the technical merits of the images themselves. I think your exposure is good on each one. Black and white conversions are great. I think that okay, if we take a look at this image right here, take a look at the black areas of this image, and then come over here to the black areas of this image, we can see that this image is a little underexposed in terms of comparing it with this image. The best way to do that is take a look at the blacks. Okay, blacks, what I'm talking about is not the suit. Okay, that's going to be pure black, but I'm talking about the shadow areas in the background. Okay, that is almost gray, where that is pure black. Okay, so this is a little underexposed, showing that black. That should all have detail in it. We can see the big difference here too, right here. Okay, you see how this is a little bit less exposed. I'm sorry, it's a little bit more exposed than this image, letting more more light in the camera. So we can see little detail areas, even in the black areas of the boys' suits, whereas here it's kind of difficult. So a little bit underexposed here. That's a good shot as far as exposure goes. And then that underwater shot, I'm really curious how you did that, because that's super interesting. And then this image right here, tough shot, direct sunlight, really tough shot. But one of the inherent problems here is that you've got just this pure black right through here, showing no detail at all. But you've maintained the detail in the background, which is really cool. So what is this calling for? This is calling for a Photoshop adjustment layer to bring out some of the detail in that safety rail right there, that these boys are so dearly hanging on to, especially him. Well, he ain't letting go, is he? Okay, and then the rest of the images I think are done very well. So I'm really proud of this presentation. This one again, we have a little bit of blown to black right here. A little bit underexposed, meaning that the shadow areas are pure black instead of showing detail. So that's something you want to keep in mind. You want detail in your highlight areas and in your shadow areas. You got plenty of detail in your highlight areas. We can see right here in the hood, nothing's blown to complete white. Clouds all have detail, though. They're not blown to complete white. But on the other end of the spectrum, some of the blacks and shadow areas are blown to complete black. Okay, this is a great image. I love the texture in the background. I like the cropping of this. I think it's a really interesting composition. Again, though, it doesn't fit the cadence of the actual, when I was talking about the consistency and size of the presentation. All right, so that's what I have. Sorry I took 10 minutes. I didn't want to do that, but this is just such a fantastic assignment. It's such a fantastic narrative. I just really wanted to spend some time with it. All right, any questions, comments, or other, please let me know. Fantastic job. Thank you so much for sharing.